The last thing I remember before I died was the sound of applause. Not for me. Never for me. It was for him, for Donovan Hale, the man I loved for 6 years, standing at the center of the Silver Ridge Pack Ceremonial Hall in Sacramento, California, pressing his forehead to someone else's neck while 200 wolves watched and cheered. His mate bond ceremony, with someone who wasn't me. I stood in the back row in a shirt I'd ironed twice, and I thought, oh, so this is what a joke feels like from the inside. Setup. Who is Elias Voss? My name is Elias Voss. I'm 23 years old, I'm an Omega, and according to pretty much everyone in the Silver Ridge Pack, I am the single most unremarkable person to ever carry a designation. Not their words. Well, okay, their words. Specifically the words of Pack Mother Renata, who told me at age 16 that I had a very average scent profile and limited mating prospects. She said it the way someone comments on weather. Casual, unbothered, devastating. I grew up in a mid-level pack family in Sacramento. My dad was a beta accountant. My mom was an Omega school teacher. Neither of them ran with the powerful crowd, and neither did I. I got decent grades, worked part-time at a plant nursery on weekends, and spent the better part of my late teens quietly, privately, desperately in love with Donovan Hale, third son of the Pack's Alpha Council, built like a Viking god, smile like a sunrise, brain like a decorative throw pillow. I know. The thing people don't tell you about being an average Omega in a pack structure is that you spend your whole life being fine. Fine grades, fine apartment. My fine prospects, you don't get chosen first, but you don't get left entirely behind. You exist in the comfortable middle, the demographic nobody makes speeches about. And then Donovan looked at me one night at a pack bonfire when I was 17, said, "You smell like rain and cedar, Elias." That's rare. And I handed him my entire heart in both hands like an absolute fool. 6 years. I gave that man 6 years of quiet devotion, remembered his coffee order, showed up to his terrible rec league basketball games, talked him through his anxiety spirals at 2 a.m., loved him in the careful, steady way that Omegas love, all the way down to the bone. And tonight, he bonded with Marcus Webb in front of the whole pack. Marcus Webb, who has great hair and zero personality, and once described a sunset as fine, I guess. Fine. Who even Donovan's replacement choices are middle of the road. The inciting incident. I didn't cry during the ceremony. That felt important. I stood there and I watched, and I kept my face neutral because I have excellent emotional regulation, and also because I would rather dissolve into the floor than give Renata the satisfaction of seeing me fall apart. But after the congratulations and the champagne flutes and the pack's collective warm glow, I slipped out a side door into the parking lot, and I sat on the cold asphalt behind a pickup truck, and I put my face in my hands. And that's when I touched the gravel. It was an accident. My palm pressed flat against the ground, fingers splayed, and something cracked open behind my eyes. Images, sharp and sudden. This parking lot 20 years ago, a woman crying in the same spot, he holding a rejection letter, whispering, "It won't always be like this." I yanked my hand back like I'd touched fire. That had never happened before. I pressed my palm down again, slower. The images returned, layered, vivid, like watching someone else's memory on a screen inside my skull. The woman, the letter. Then further back, a teenage boy fixing a car, laughing, grease on his knuckles. Then a child drawing with chalk on the asphalt, humming. Psychometry. The word floated up from somewhere in my memory. A designation lecture in high school. The ability to read the history of objects and places through touch. I had never in 23 years shown a single psychic ability. Omegas like me didn't get powers. We got fine scent profiles and limited prospects. I sat back against the cold metal of the truck bumper. My hands were shaking. The parking lot hummed with the distant sound of pack celebration inside. Donovan's new bond being toasted with expensive wine. Something had shifted. Something in me, cracked open by grief, had finally woken up. I looked down at my trembling hands. "Okay," I said quietly to no one. "So apparently we're doing this now." And somewhere in my chest, for the first time in 6 years, Something that wasn't heartbreak started to burn. I flexed my fingers slowly, watching them like they belonged to someone else. The sensation from the gravel had faded, but the echo of it remained, sitting warm and strange behind my sternum. Like a door I didn't know existed had swung open exactly 1 inch, and cold light was bleeding through the crack. I pressed my palm to the asphalt again. This time nothing came. I tried the side of the truck. Nothing. My own jacket sleeve. Nothing. Seriously? I muttered. You wake up for 5 seconds and then take a nap? That's very on-brand for my life, actually. I dropped my head back against the bumper and stared up at the Sacramento sky, which was doing its usual thing of being beautiful and completely indifferent to my problems. Stars scattered overhead like someone had knocked over a jar of salt. The air smelled like dry grass and distance, and the faint ceremonial cedar smoke drifting from inside the hall. Donovan's ceremony smoke. Right. I closed my eyes. I was not going to spiral. Spiraling was for people with time. I had a studio apartment, a part-time job at a plant nursery, and apparently some kind of latent psychic ability that worked exactly once and then clocked out. I had things to figure out. I did not have the luxury of sitting in a parking lot having emotions about a man who just bonded with someone whose most interesting quality was fine, I guess. I opened my eyes. That's when the light appeared. Not a phone screen, not a passing car. Something else. A pale silver-blue glow about 2 feet in front of my face, hovering at eye level like it had been waiting politely for me to stop monologuing. I stared at it. It stared back. Or at least it felt like it did. Then text appeared inside it, clean and floating, like a notification from an app I had never downloaded. Future Site System. Initialization complete. Host identified, Elias Voss. Designation, Omega. Tier 7, latent. Psychometric ability, unlocked, first task available. I blinked, the text stayed. Okay, I said carefully. I'm either having a breakdown or the universe has genuinely terrible timing. The light pulsed once like it was agreeing with me. A second line appeared beneath the first. Your future has been recalibrated. The path you were on led to death within 72 hours. A new route has been assigned. The parking lot went very quiet. Death. Within 72 hours. I sat up straighter. What does that mean? What death? My death? Confirmed. Previous timeline. Host Elias Voss exits the Silver Ridgepack territory alone. Host is struck by a vehicle on Interstate 5 at 11:47 p.m. Host does not survive. The cold came fast. It moved up from the base of my spine and spread across my shoulders like someone had pressed ice to the back of my neck. My breath came out thin and unsteady. I had been planning to drive home on Interstate 5 tonight. I had literally been about to get up and do that. So you're telling me, I said slowly, that if I leave right now and drive home the way I always drive home, I die tonight. Correct. And you waited until now to tell me this. System initialization requires an emotional catalyst. The activation of your psychometric ability served as the trigger. Earlier notification was not possible. I pressed 2 fingers to my temple. You needed me to be heartbroken in a parking lot first. That was the requirement. Heartbreak was the key. The system did not respond to that, which I chose to interpret as guilt. I exhaled slowly, looking back up at the sky. The cedar smoke was still drifting. Inside the hall, I could hear muffled music starting, someone laughing loudly, glasses clinking. Donovan's new life beginning in real time. 40 feet away from where I was learning, I had almost died without ever knowing what I was capable of. Something moved through me then. Not grief exactly, not anger, something quieter and more dangerous than either. Clarity. I looked back at the floating light. All right, what's the first task? The system pulsed and new text scrolled forward. Task 1. Do not leave the pack territory tonight. Remain until dawn. An encounter before sunrise will change your trajectory. What encounter? That information is locked until you complete the task. Of course it is. I pushed myself up off the cold asphalt, brushing gravel from my palms. My legs were steadier than I expected. Fine, I'll stay. But I want it on record that this is an extremely inconvenient night for a supernatural awakening. The light pulsed again, warmer this time. and almost like it was amused. I stood alone in the parking lot with the stars overhead and the smoke in the air, and something new and electric humming under my skin. And I thought about how 6 years of loving the wrong person had nearly gotten me killed. Then I straightened my jacket, turned away from the highway, and walked back toward the light. Not the system light. That one had faded the moment I stood up, folding itself away like a notification I had already read. No. I walked back toward the warm glow spilling from the hall's side entrance, the one propped open with a brick, leaking music and the smell of expensive whiskey and cedar smoke into the cool Sacramento night. I had nowhere else to go. The system said stay until dawn. Dawn was roughly 5 hours away. And I was not going to sit in the parking lot for 5 hours, communing with gravel. I slipped back inside. The ceremony had dissolved into a proper pack gathering, the kind where the formal structure melts away and everyone splits into their social clusters. Bonded pairs near the bar, elder wolves occupying the round tables near the back. Younger pack members crowding the open floor, drinks in hand, voices loud. I found a corner near the drink table, poured myself water because I was already emotionally overwhelmed, and adding alcohol felt like a terrible idea, and stood there being invisible, which I was historically very good at. That's when I felt it. Not the system. Something older than the system. Something that lived in the base of my spine and the back of my throat and every instinct I had ever been told to suppress as a low-tier omega. A scent. 3 cents, actually, layered over each other in a way that made no logical sense because scents didn't do that. They didn't stack like chords in a song. But these did. Pine resin and rain-soaked stone, dark roast coffee and burning cedar, salt air and something metallic and clean, like the sky before lightning. My whole nervous system stood up straight. I turned slowly, the way you turn when you already know something is behind you and you're buying yourself 1 extra second of not knowing exactly what. There were 3 of them standing near the hall entrance, and every single person in the room had shifted slightly away from them without appearing to notice they had done it. That involuntary, instinctive social gravity that powerful alphas generated just by existing in a space. I knew who they were. Everyone in California knew who they were. The Ashford triplets. Colton Ashford was the one on the left, and he was the reason people used the word cold as a compliment. Tall, sharp-jawed, wearing a dark jacket like he had been poured into it. His eyes moved across the room in slow, precise arcs, cataloging everything, settling on nothing. He looked like a man who made decisions the way other people breathe, automatically, without mercy. Sawyer Ashford stood in the middle, and he was smiling at something his brother said, which should have made him look approachable. It did not. His smile had that particular quality of something dangerous choosing, in this moment, to be charming. Like a lit match deciding to stay in someone's fingers a little longer than comfortable. He was broader than Colton, easier in his body, and somehow that made him more unsettling. River Ashford was on the right, and he was the one looking at me, not scanning the room, not checking his phone, looking directly, specifically at me, with an expression I could not read from this distance, but which made the back of my neck feel warm. River was the quietest looking of the 3, slightly softer around the edges, though that was a relative term when the comparison was his brother's. He had the same strong build, the same unmistakable alpha presence, but where Colton radiated command and Sawyer radiated danger, River radiated something that felt almost like attention, like he was the kind of person who actually listened when you spoke. I did not trust that. Listening was a skill. Skills could be performed. I turned back to my water glass. The system flickered at the edge of my vision. Encounter identified. Absolutely not, I whispered into my cup. These are the individuals referenced in Task 1. I see that. Your heart rate has increased by 34%. That is private information, and you are being invasive. A hand touched my shoulder, not grabbed, not gripped, just touched, 2 fingers light against my jacket. The way you get someone's attention when you're trying not to startle them. I turned around. Sawyer Ashford was standing close enough that I could smell him properly now. That dark roast and cedar combination, hitting my senses like a slow collision. Up close, his eyes were a warm amber brown. And his smile had dialed itself down from dangerous to something that was almost genuine. You're Elias Voss, he said. Not a question. My chin came up automatically. Depends on who's asking and why. The smile widened by exactly 1 degree. Sawyer Ashford, and my brother River hasn't stopped looking at you since we walked in, which means I had to come introduce myself before he worked up the nerve. He tilted his head slightly. Also, you smell like something we've been looking for a very long time. The hall noise continued around us. Somewhere across the room, Donovan laughed at something Marcus said. I looked up at Sawyer Ashford and felt the door in my chest open another inch. That, I said carefully, is either the best or worst thing anyone has ever said to me in a parking lot adjacent situation. He laughed. Mona actually laughed, surprised and real. And the cedar and coffee scent wrapped around me like it had always known where I was. I took a small step back. Not dramatic, just enough to remind my nervous system that it lived in my body and not in Sawyer Ashford's general vicinity. So, I said, keeping my voice even, you walked across a room full of people to tell me I smell like something you've been looking for. And you thought that would land well. It landed, Sawyer said. It landed weird. You're still talking to me. I opened my mouth, closed it. He had a point, and I resented it deeply. The system pulsed once at the edge of my vision, smug and silent, and I made a mental note to figure out if psychic abilities came with an off switch. Sawyer's attention shifted slightly, moving past my shoulder, and I felt the air change before I heard the footsteps. 2 sets, unhurried. The kind of walk that didn't need to announce itself because the room was already making space. I turned around because not turning around felt more vulnerable somehow. Colton Ashford stopped about 3 feet away, hands in his jacket pockets, and looked at me with the focused precision of someone reading a document. Not rude, just thorough. Like I was information he was processing. River stopped beside him and did the opposite of everything his brothers had done. He didn't scan me. He didn't smile with an edge. He just looked at me with those quiet, steady eyes and said, "Hi." 1 word, completely unweaponized. I was more unsettled by it than everything Sawyer had said. "Hi," I said back, which was not my most impressive moment. Colton spoke without preamble. "You're unaffiliated as of tonight." I blinked. "Excuse me?" Donovan Hale formally completed his bond an hour ago. Any informal attachment structures dissolve at completion. You're now unaffiliated within this pack's social hierarchy. He said it with the same energy someone might use to explain a parking policy. That makes you eligible for reassignment or independent status. I prefer the term single, I said, but thank you for the bureaucratic version. Something moved across Colton's expression, not quite amusement, more like recalibration. Sawyer made a sound behind me that was definitely a suppressed laugh. River was still just looking at me, and I wished he would stop because it was doing something uncomfortable to my chest. "We'd like you to come with us," Colton said. The hall noise continued its cheerful, oblivious hum around us. Somewhere to my left, a group of pack members burst into laughter. A slow song had started, low and warm, threading through the crowd. I looked at Colton Ashford, then at Sawyer, then at River, then back at Colton. "You'd like me to leave a pack gathering with 3 alphas I met 4 minutes ago," I said, "based on the fact that I smell like something. Do I have that right?" "The scent is part of it," Colton said. "What's the other part?" A pause, brief but real. River answered instead. His voice was lower than his brother's and unhurried. "You didn't flinch when you saw us walk in. Everyone else in this room adjusted. You turned around, clocked us, and turned back to your drink." The corner of his mouth moved, barely. "That was interesting." I stared at him. I turned back to my drink because I was processing a lot of information, and hydration felt like a reasonable response. "See?" Sawyer said warmly. "That's exactly what he means." The system flickered again. "Leaving with them is the correct choice. Probability of positive outcome, 71%. I thought very pointedly at it. "What about the other 29%? It did not answer. Helpful. Outside, the Sacramento night had gotten colder, the kind of cold that came off the valley in late spring when the sun dropped and the land remembered it wasn't summer yet. The Ashfords had a car waiting, which I was choosing not to find intimidating. Black SUV, clean, pack insignia nowhere visible. River held the door. I stopped at the curb. "If this is some kind of power play," I said, addressing all 3 of them, "or a territorial claim maneuver, or anything that involves the words 'you belong to us now,' I want you to know I have a developing psychic ability and questionable impulse control, and I will make your evening significantly more complicated. Colton looked at me steadily. It's not. What is it then? A conversation, River said from beside the open door. Just a conversation. You can leave whenever you want. We'll drive you back here ourselves. I looked at the hall behind me. Through the window I could see the golden light, the moving figures, and there near the center, Donovan's broad shoulders as he leaned into Marcus. Comfortable, complete, already rewritten. I looked at the black car, at three alphas who smelled like a storm system and apparently found my emotional coping mechanisms interesting. I got in the car. Ain't for the record, Maitsha, I said, as River slid in beside me and the door closed. This is either the beginning of something important or the premise of a very bad decision. Could be both, Sawyer said from the front seat. Statistically likely, Colton added from behind the wheel. River said nothing, but his shoulder was warm where it pressed against mine in the back seat, steady and unhurried, and the pine resin and rain-soaked stone scent wrapped around the cold place in my chest. I didn't move away, which was information about myself I was going to need to sit with later when I wasn't sandwiched between River Ashford's quiet warmth and the door of a moving vehicle, watching Sacramento slide past the window in long ribbons of streetlight and shadow. Nobody spoke for the first few minutes. I appreciated that more than I expected to. And most people filled silence because silence made them nervous. These three sat in it like they had built their house there. Colton drove with one hand on the wheel, his eyes on the road, his posture the kind of still that wasn't relaxed but wasn't tense either, just contained. Sawyer had turned slightly in the passenger seat so his back was against the window, one knee up, watching the road ahead with that low-level amusement he seemed to carry everywhere like a carry-on bag. River was just there, present, solid. The warmth of his shoulder against mine had not shifted since we pulled out of the parking lot, and I had done a full internal audit of my own responses and determined that I was not leaning into it. I was simply not leaning away from it. There was a difference. Where are we going? I said. Not alarmed, just checking. Ashford property, Colton said. 20 minutes north of the city. Pack land. And you're telling me this now. You didn't ask until now. I looked at the back of his head. You know, most people lead with the destination. Most people aren't us, Sawyer said pleasantly. That is becoming very clear. River made a quiet sound beside me. Not quite a laugh. Something smaller. I filed it away without meaning to. The system had gone quiet since I got in the car, which I chose to interpret as approval. Either that or it was as confused as I was, which was somehow more comforting. The city thinned out, subdivisions giving way to larger lots, then open land, oak trees spreading wide against the dark sky. The air through the cracked window smelled like dry grass and distant water. Northern Sacramento Valley in late spring marked the kind of landscape that looked like the beginning of something. We turned down a private road. The house that appeared at the end of it was not what I expected. I had anticipated something designed to intimidate, all hard angles and pack authority. Instead, it was large but grounded, the kind of structure that had grown into its land over time. Stone and dark wood, wide porch, a light on inside that made the front windows glow amber. It looked quietly and unexpectedly like somewhere people actually lived. Colton parked and we got out, and the night air hit me fully, and I stood for a moment on the stone path and just breathed. The system pulsed gently. Task 2. Tell them the truth about tonight. I thought back at it. Which truth? There are several. All of it. Excellent, I muttered. What? Sawyer said. Nothing. A nice house. Inside, the house was warm and direct. No excessive display. A wide main room with a low couch and a coffee table that had clearly been used for actual work. Papers stacked neatly to one side. Bookshelves. A kitchen open to the living space. Clean but lived in. River moved to the kitchen without being asked and came back with a glass of water, which he set in front of me on the coffee table without making it a gesture. I sat on the couch. All three of them settled around the room. Not crowding, not performing casualness. Colton took the chair across from me. Sawyer leaned against the bookshelf. River sat on the far end of the same couch, enough distance to be respectful. close enough to still be present. Talk, Colton said. I looked at him. That's your opening? Just talk? We brought you here because your scent triggered something none of us have felt before, he said, with the same energy someone might use to deliver a quarterly report. We'd like to understand why. Talking seemed like the logical first step. Revolutionary communication strategy, I said. Truly. Sawyer grinned. River's mouth moved. I looked down at the water glass. Then I pressed my fingertips to the coffee table. Lightly, just to see. Images came immediately, soft and layered. 3 boys at this table doing homework. Someone crying here once, alone late at night. A much older man, hands wrapped around a mug, looking out the window for a long time. Then nothing, just warmth. Years of it, soaked into the wood. I pulled my hand back. That started tonight, I said, before I had consciously decided to tell them. The psychometry. I've never had any ability before. I touched the ground in a parking lot and saw 20 years of other people's memories. I looked up. The same night the person I spent 6 years loving bonded with someone else. Apparently grief is my activation event. Very poetic, I hate it. Nobody spoke immediately. That was the right response. Then River said quietly, 6 years. 6 years. And he never claimed you. He said the timing wasn't right. I picked up the water glass. Turns out the timing was right, just not for me. The room held that. Colton's jaw shifted slightly. Sawyer had stopped smiling, not in a heavy way, just in a real one. River was looking at the middle distance, something moving behind his expression that I couldn't name but recognized. It looked like old pain identifying itself in someone else. The system told me not to drive home tonight, I said. It said I would have died on Interstate 5. It told me staying was the right choice. I set the glass down. Then you 3 walked in. Colton leaned forward slowly. What system? I met his eyes. They were gray, I noticed. Sharp and gray and currently very focused. That, I said, is a longer conversation. And somewhere in the house, a clock ticked, and the oak trees moved against the windows. And all 3 of them leaned in slightly without appearing to notice they had done it. I noticed. I noticed the way Colton's forearms came forward to rest on his knees, losing that careful, contained posture for the first time since I had met him. I noticed the way Sawyer pushed off the bookshelf and crossed the room slowly, dropping into the chair closest to the couch like proximity had become more important than looking relaxed. I noticed River, who had not moved, but whose stillness had changed quality entirely, the way a room changes when someone in it starts paying a different kind of attention. 3 alphas. Leaning in, the system pulsed once, warm and quiet. Heart rate elevated, scent output increasing, recommendation, breathe. I thought back at it very deliberately. You are not helpful. It pulsed again. Definitely smug. The system, I said, wrapping both hands around the water glass to give them something to do, appeared in the parking lot about 40 minutes before you 3 walked into that hall. It presented itself as a notification, like an app update nobody asked for. I paused. It showed me my own death, gave me a task, and then pointed at you 3 like you were the answer to a question I hadn't asked yet. Colton was very still. It showed you your death. Interstate 5, 11:47 p.m. I was going to drive home that way. I looked at the clock on the wall. It was 11:52. So that's a thing. The silence that followed was a different kind than before, heavier. Colton looked at Sawyer. Some wordless exchange passed between them, the kind that lived in the particular shorthand of people who had grown up sharing every room. Sawyer exhaled through his nose. Elias, still me, yes. How are you this calm? I considered the question honestly. I'm not calm. I'm just very good at performing calm because I grew up in a pack structure that rewarded composed omegas, and I have years of practice. Internally, I'm somewhere between a controlled burn and a full system failure. I set the water glass down. Thank you for asking, though. That was almost emotionally perceptive. River made that small sound again. Closer to a laugh this time. Colton stood up. He crossed the room without announcement and came back from the kitchen with a folded blanket, which he set on the couch beside me without a word. Not draped over me, not presented with any ceremony, just placed there, available in case I wanted it. I stared at it. Then I picked it up and pulled it over my lap because the room was cool and I was not made of stone. The system, Colton said, returning to his chair, is consistent with something we were told about 6 months ago. He folded his hands together, measured and deliberate. When our Pax Elder told us there was an Omega somewhere in Northern California whose awakening would be a catalyst, a specific scent signature, psychometric ability, reborn potential. His gray eyes settled on me. We didn't take it especially seriously. And now, I said, now you're sitting on our couch. Right. I pulled the blanket slightly higher. So when you said I smelled like something you'd been looking for, you meant that literally. Yes, Colton said. And none of you thought to open with that information. We thought it might sound alarming, River said. I turned to look at him. As opposed to you smell like something we've been looking for, which you led with in a public venue and which was completely normal. River looked at Sawyer. Sawyer looked at the ceiling. Colton's expression did something that, on a less controlled face, would have been a wince. Fair point, River said quietly. I almost smiled. Almost. Sawyer leaned forward now, elbows on his knees, the dangerous charm dialed fully down to something genuine and less rehearsed. Can I ask you something real? You've already asked me several things. You didn't check then either. The corner of his mouth moved. The 6 years. Did you know the whole time it wasn't going to work? The question landed softly, but it landed deep. I looked at the blanket in my lap. Outside, the oak trees shifted against the window, and the valley wind moved through the grass, and the clock kept its steady count. I knew, I said, not consciously, but somewhere I knew. You can love someone past the point where it makes sense. Will you just keep rewriting the math until it almost adds up? I smoothed a crease in the blanket with my thumb. I think I stayed because leaving felt like admitting I had wasted myself on someone who was never going to see me, and that was a harder thing to know than the loneliness. The room held that carefully. River moved then. Not dramatic. He simply closed half the distance between us on the couch and reached out, and his hand came to rest over mine on the blanket, warm and unhurried. No pressure in it, just presence. I looked down at his hand. I thought about the 6 years, the ironed shirt, the basketball games, the 2 a.m. phone calls, the ceremony hall and the applause and the parking lot gravel, and the pale blue light that had cracked open something in me that had been waiting a very long time. I turned my hand over slowly and let my fingers rest against his palm. His scent deepened, just slightly. Rain-soaked stone, warming. The system gave me a second task tonight, I said, my voice quieter now but steady. It told me to tell you the truth about everything. I looked up at all three of them in turn. I think it might be building towards something I'm not fully ready for. Sawyer watched me with those amber eyes, soft and serious. What kind of something? I looked back down at River's hand in mine. The kind, I said, that changes what home means. Nobody rushed to answer that. The clock ticked. The wind moved. The blanket was warm in my lap. And for the first time in 6 years, the silence around me didn't feel like being alone. That feeling lasted exactly 14 minutes. I know because I watched the clock without meaning to, the way you watch something when part of you is waiting for it to end. 14 minutes of warmth in River's hand and the oak trees and Sawyer asking me quiet questions about the psychometry, genuinely curious. Leaning forward with his elbows on his knees like I was the most interesting thing he had encountered in a long time. 14 minutes of feeling, carefully and dangerously, like maybe the system had been right. Then Colton's phone buzzed on the coffee table. He glanced at it. Something in his face closed like a shutter. Excuse me, he said, and stood and walked to the far end of the room, phone to his ear, voice dropped below hearing. I watched him go. Then I looked at Sawyer, who was no longer leaning forward. He had straightened. And something careful had moved into his expression, the way clouds move in before rain, gradual and then all at once. River's hand had not moved from mine, but I felt the change in him too, a subtle tension, like a string being tuned one note tighter. What's happening? I said. Not a question exactly, more like a door opening. Sawyer looked at me. In the amber brown of his eyes, there was something I recognized with uncomfortable precision because I had spent 6 years learning to read the face of a man who kept things from me. He was deciding how much to say. Sawyer. It might be nothing, he said. It's not nothing. Your brother looks like nothing is his neutral setting, and right now he looks like something. What is it? Colton came back across the room and stood at the edge of the coffee table and looked at me with those precise gray eyes and said, Donovan Hale has filed a scent complaint with the Pack Council. I heard the words. I processed them one at a time, the way you process something that doesn't make immediate sense. A scent complaint, I said, against you, filed 20 minutes ago, time-stamped during the ceremony reception. Colton's voice was level, not unkind, just exact. He's claiming your pheromone output tonight was disruptive to his bonding ceremony, that your scent interfered with the ritual and compromised the integrity of his bond with Marcus Webb. The blanket was still in my lap. River's hand was still on mine. And I became very aware of both things in the way you become aware of details when your mind needs something small and concrete to hold on to. He's blaming me, I said, for his own bonding ceremony, that he planned, that I didn't attend by invitation, that I stood in the back of. Yes, Colton said, because my scent woke up tonight. The complaint specifically references an unusual pheromone spike detected by multiple pack members during the second ritual phase. I pulled my hand back from Rivers. Not angrily, just because I needed both of my hands to belong to me for a moment. That's why the system activated, I said, mostly to myself. The pieces were sliding into place with a specific, horrible efficiency of things that made sense in the worst way. My ability unlocked because something in me changed tonight. As the scent changed with it, and Donovan felt it during his own ceremony, and instead of examining what that meant about his bond, he filed a complaint. Nobody corrected me. He felt the pull, I said. Didn't he? Even bonded. He felt it and panicked. Colton sat back down, slowly. That would be consistent with what the elder described. Your scent signature, once active, would affect alphas in proximity, even bonded ones if the bond is not fully settled. I stared at the coffee table, the wood grain, the water glass, the blanket in my lap. Then I pressed my fingertips flat against the table surface. Not to read it, just to feel something solid. Images came anyway. The three boys again, younger this time. An argument at this table. Voices raised, something broken and then repaired. Then one image that arrived sharper than the others. A man who looked like an older version of all three of them, sitting exactly where Colton sat now, holding a letter, his face very still and very controlled, reading something that was costing him everything. I pulled back. Your father got a letter at this table once, I said quietly. He sat exactly where you're sitting. Whatever it said, it changed something for him. Colton went absolutely still. Sawyer looked at his brother. River exhaled slowly beside me. How do you know that? Colton said. His voice had not changed in volume or tone, but it had changed in texture completely. Something raw moving underneath it. The table showed me. I looked up at him. I'm sorry. I can't always control what comes through. Colton looked at the table surface for a long moment. Then he looked at me, and for the first time since I had met him, where the shutter was open, just briefly, just enough to see what was behind it. That letter, he said, was the notification of our mother's death. The clock ticked. I did not say I'm sorry because it would have been too small for what he had just handed me. Instead, I held it the way he had handed it, carefully with both hands. The complaint, Sawyer said, bringing us back with a gentleness that surprised me, means the council will summon you, probably tomorrow. They'll want to assess your scent output and determine if you're a pack disruption risk. There it was, the drop. Pack disruption risk. In pack law, that meant temporary designation suppression, scent blockers, mandatory, ability restriction, enforced. All of it legal, all of it designed for exactly this. An inconvenient omega whose awakening made powerful people uncomfortable. I had just found out I was something, and the first thing that happened was someone trying to make me nothing again. I stood up. The blanket fell from my lap, and I didn't pick it up. He knew, I said, and my voice came out very quiet and very clear. Donovan knew something changed in me tonight. He felt it during his own ceremony, with his own bonded mate standing next to him. And rather than sit with what that meant, he picked up his phone and tried to bury me in paperwork. I looked at Colton. He wasn't protecting his bond. He was protecting his ego. Sawyer was watching me with something in his expression that wasn't pity. It was recognition. River had stood up too, without fanfare, and he was simply there, close, in the way he seemed to do everything, and present without demanding anything for it. The council summons, I said. Can it be contested? Colton's eyes sharpened. Yes, with a formal Alpha sponsorship. If a recognized Alpha house vouches for the Omega in question, the complaint goes to arbitration instead of direct assessment. I looked at him. He looked at me. We just met 4 hours ago, I said. Yes, Colton said. You don't know me. We know enough. That is an extremely fast decision for someone who introduced himself by explaining my social status like a terms of service agreement. Something moved in his face. Not quite a smile. The ghost of one, maybe in the place where a smile would eventually live if you gave it enough time. Will you let us sponsor you, he said, flat and direct, and underneath it, unmistakably, a question that cost him something to ask. Mara, I stood in the warm living room of a house that smelled like pine and cedar and rain, with 3 alphas who had pulled me out of a parking lot 4 hours ago. And I thought about Donovan filing a complaint on the same night his bond ceremony was toasted with champagne. And I thought about the system showing me my own death. And I thought about the door in my chest that had been opening inch by inch all night. Yes, I said, then immediately, but I have conditions. Sawyer made a sound that was fully a laugh this time, real and warm, filling the room. River looked at me with those quiet eyes, and the corner of his mouth curved, slow and certain, like something he had been expecting. And Colton looked at me like I had just become a more interesting document. Outside, the Sacramento Valley stretched dark and wide under its scattering of stars. And somewhere on Interstate 5, it was 11:58 p.m., and I was alive, and I was angry, and I was something new. The system pulsed, bright and certain. Good. Now the real work begins. I looked at the system's floating text, still glowing faintly at the edge of my vision, and thought very deliberately, I know. Stop being dramatic about it. It faded, finally learning some manners. Colton was still watching me with that recalibrated expression, the one that had replaced his original assessment of me with something more complicated. Sawyer had settled back into his chair, but his posture had changed. Less performance, more attention. River had not sat back down. He was standing slightly behind my left shoulder, not crowding, just there, and Mara and I had stopped pretending I didn't find that steadying. Conditions, Colton said. The word was neutral, but there was something underneath it that sounded almost like respect trying to decide if it was ready to introduce itself. 3 of them, I said. Non-negotiable. Go ahead. I held up one finger. I don't move into this house. I don't relocate. I don't transfer my PAC registration. I don't restructure my life around yours. I have a job and an apartment and a routine, and those stay mine until I decide otherwise. If this sponsorship requires me to become a fixture in your territory to look legitimate, we need to discuss that before I sign anything. Colton nodded once. Reasonable. Second finger. I have full access to whatever information your elder gave you about me. The prophecy, the scent signature, the catalyst information, all of it. I am not walking into a council arbitration as the last person in the room to understand what I actually am. Sawyer tilted his head. Also reasonable. I wasn't finished. Third finger. Nobody makes decisions about my ability or my designation or my future without my direct input. Not the council, not your elder, not you 3. I looked at each of them in turn, saving Colton for last because he was the one most likely to have opinions about jurisdictional authority. I understand you have PAC standing, and I currently have a complaint filed against me, and you are in a position to help. I am genuinely grateful for that, but grateful is not the same as available. Are we clear? The room was quiet for a moment. Then Colton said, yes. Just that. No qualification, no amendment, no negotiation. But I had prepared for negotiation. The lack of it sat strangely, like stepping off a curb that turned out to be flat ground. That was easy, I said, slightly suspicious. You're right about all 3 points, Colton said. I don't make agreements I intend to reinterpret later. If I say yes, it means yes. I studied his face for the tell. The micro expression that meant the yes had asterisks. I had spent 6 years learning to read asterisks in Donovan's face, the small compressions around his eyes when he agreed to something he planned to quietly rewrite later. Colton's face had no asterisks. It was just the statement, clean and load-bearing, sitting there in the open. That was either the most trustworthy thing I had encountered in years or an extremely sophisticated performance. I filed it under pending verification and moved forward. "Now the elder," I said, sitting back down, pulling the blanket back into my lap because the room was still cool, and I was not going to refuse warmth on principle. "Tell me everything." Sawyer looked at Colton. Colton looked at the middle distance for exactly 2 seconds, which I was learning was his version of a deep breath, and then he spoke. "Her name is Miriam Vance. She's been the Ashford Pack Elder for 30 years. 6 months ago, she called us in for what we expected to be a routine territory briefing." He paused. It was not a territory briefing. Clearly, she told us that somewhere in Northern California, an Omega was approaching an awakening, that this Omega had been living suppressed, not artificially, just circumstantially. Emotional suppression, years of redirected energy, love given to someone who didn't return it at full depth. His gray eyes came back to mine. She said grief would be the key, that the Omega would unlock on the night he lost the thing he had been using to keep himself small. The blanket felt very still in my lap. Sawyer's voice came in softer. She said his scent, once active, would be unlike anything recorded in pack history. Not dangerous, just rare. The kind that doesn't ask permission, it just lands. He looked at me with those amber eyes, honest now in a way that had nothing to do with charm. "When you walked back into that hall tonight, Elias, we were on the other side of the room and I felt it like a door opening. You felt my scent from across a crowded room. I felt it like a memory of something I'd never experienced," he said. "It's like recognizing a song you've never heard before." I did not have an immediate sassy response to that. That was a first. River moved then, coming around to sit on the coffee table directly across from me, close enough that I could see the details of his expression clearly. His eyes were a deep, steady brown, darker than Sawyer's amber, and they held that quality of full attention that I kept not knowing what to do with. "Can I tell you something?" he said. "You're going to anyway." "Probably," he agreed, unbothered. "When Miriam told us about the Omega, I was the only one who asked if he was okay. Colton asked about the pack implications. Sawyer asked about the scent signature mechanics." River's voice was quiet and even. "I asked if he was going to be all right. Nah, going through that kind of loss alone." I felt something shift in my chest. Not dramatically, just a quiet internal rearrangement, like furniture moved 2 inches to the left, the same room but suddenly more space to breathe. "And," I said, "she said he would be, eventually." River looked at me steadily. "She said he was stronger than he knew, and that the people meant to find him would know him by the way he held his ground, even when everything fell apart." I held his gaze. "That's a very poetic way to describe someone having a breakdown in a parking lot." "You weren't having a breakdown," River said simply. "You were recalibrating." The clock ticked. The oak trees shifted. Sawyer had gone very quiet, watching us with an expression that was warm and careful and deliberately not interfering. Colton stood and walked to the bookshelf and pulled out a folder. He brought it to the coffee table and set it down between River and me. Inside, handwritten notes in a careful script, pages of them, diagrams of scent mapping, pack records going back decades, and at the top of the first page, underlined twice in blue ink, 2 words, Elias Voss. My name, written 6 months ago by a woman I had never met. I stared at it for a long moment. "She knew my name," I said. "She knew everything," Colton said. "We just didn't know if you'd want to be found." I touched the edge of the page. Images came immediately. Miriam's hands writing this, her expression focused and certain. A small lamp on the desk, late at night, and underneath all of it, layered like a frequency, something that felt unmistakably like hope. I pulled my fingers back. My throat was doing something I was not going to acknowledge out loud. "The arbitration," I said, steadying my voice. "When is it?" "Council convenes at 10 a.m., Colton said. "We have 8 hours. Then I need to understand pack arbitration procedure, everything in that folder, and your elders' complete notes before sunrise." I looked up at all 3 of them. I am not walking into that room uninformed. I walked into 6 years uninformed, and look how that went. Sawyer leaned forward and picked up the folder. Then we start now. Now, Colton confirmed. River looked at me from across the coffee table, quiet and certain, and said, "We're not going to let them suppress you, Elias." It was a simple sentence, 4 words of actual content, but it arrived in the specific empty place where 6 years of waiting to be chosen had lived. And it settled there with a weight that was not heavy but permanent. I squared my shoulders. "I know," I said, "because I'm not going to let them either. You're just the backup plan." Sawyer laughed. River smiled, full and real, the first time I had seen it completely, and it was the kind of smile that rearranged things. Colton opened his mouth. Then his phone buzzed again. He looked at the screen, and this time, whatever closed in his face was different. Not the careful shudder from before. Something older. Something that lived deeper. He looked up at me and said, "Miriam is here." I had not heard a car. I had not heard the door. But when I turned toward the hallway, there was a woman standing at the edge of the living room in a gray coat, small and unhurried, with eyes that were dark and precise and already looking directly at me, like she had been looking at me for 6 months, like she had always known exactly where I was. Miriam Vance was not what I expected. I had constructed an image from the folder in the reverence in the way the three of them said her name. Something imposing, ceremonial, the kind of elder who entered rooms like a weather event. Instead, she was small and unhurried, with silver hair pulled back cleanly, and the kind of face that had stopped performing patience decades ago because it had simply become patient. Her coat was gray wool, her shoes were practical. She looked like someone's favorite professor, the one whose class changed how you saw everything, and you never quite recovered. She looked at me the way you look at something you have been waiting a long time to see finally come true. "Elias," she said. Not a greeting exactly. More like a confirmation. "Miriam," I said back. Then because I could not help it. "You wrote my name in a folder 6 months ago. I feel like I should be more surprised by that than I am." The corner of her mouth moved. "You are exactly as I expected." "Is that good or bad?" "Entirely good," she said, and crossed the room and sat in the chair Colton had vacated, folding her hands in her lap with the ease of someone who had made herself at home in difficult rooms for 30 years. She looked at the three brothers briefly, something passing between them that was too layered for me to read, and then she looked back at me. "Sit down, Elias. What I have to tell you is not alarming, but it is large." I sat. The blanket was still in my lap. River had moved to the couch beside me again, not close enough to crowd, close enough to be present. Sawyer leaned against the wall near the hallway entrance. Colton stood at the edge of the room, arms at his sides, watching Miriam with an attention that looked very close to what his expression had been when I read the table and told him about his father. Miriam looked at me steadily. "You know by now that your awakening was predicted. What you don't know is why it matters beyond the scent bond and the ability." She paused. "The Silver Ridge Pack has been under a quiet governance corruption for 11 years. It began with the current council head, a man named Gerald Pruitt, who has been systematically reclassifying low-tier Omegas as pack disruption risks to absorb their registered assets into council holdings. Small cases, quiet paperwork, nothing dramatic enough to draw attention." She tilted her head slightly. "Donovan Hale's complaint against you tonight is not a coincidence. Gerald Pruitt called him before he filed it." The room went very still. I processed that in layers, the way the psychometry worked, one image at a time. Donovan's panic during the ceremony, the phone in his hand 20 minutes later, the specific language of the complaint, pack disruption risk, which I now understood was not improvised language but borrowed language, a template someone handed him. "He was used," I said. "He allowed himself to be used," Miriam said, and the distinction in her voice was clean and unsentimental. "There is a difference. Donovan Hale is not a villain, Elias. He is a weak man who chose convenience over conscience when a powerful person made it easy." She paused. "That does not excuse it, but it is the accurate shape of it." I sat with that. The accurate shape of it. 6 years of loving someone who, when the moment came, chose convenience over conscience. It didn't make the 6 years meaningless. It just made them clearly, finally, what they were. "The arbitration," I said. "Pruitt will be running it." "Yes," Miriam said. and he will expect an unsponsored, freshly awakened Omega with no legal standing and no pack protection. She looked at me, then at the three brothers, then back at me. He will not be expecting what walks in. Colton stepped forward. We file the sponsorship tonight. Full Ashford House sponsorship, not provisional. It goes into the council record before dawn, which means by the time Pruitt opens the session, it is already a matter of formal record he cannot dismiss. There's more, Sawyer said. Forna, and his voice had that quality again of something genuine underneath the ease. Full sponsorship means the complaint against you becomes a complaint against our house. Pruitt would have to argue against the Ashford pack in open arbitration, which means every other pack elder in the room will be watching. And Miriam will be in the room, River said quietly beside me. I looked at all of them. Then I looked at Miriam. You've been building this case for 11 years, I said. I have been waiting for the right catalyst, she said. Corruption does not fall to force alone. It falls when someone it tried to erase stands up in the room where it lives and refuses to be made small. She held my gaze. You are the right catalyst, Elias. Not because of the prophecy, not because of your scent, because of what you did tonight. I sat in a parking lot and had feelings. You stayed, she said simply. When leaving was easier and staying was unknown and frightening, you stayed and you asked good questions, and you did not let grief turn you bitter. That is rarer than any ability. She paused. And you told three strange alphas your conditions before you agreed to anything, which is exactly the kind of person this situation requires. Sawyer made a sound. Even Colton's expression shifted, and this time the ghost of a smile found its way fully to the surface for exactly 1 second before he recomposed. River was smiling beside me and not bothering to hide it. I looked down at my hands, the hands that had touched gravel and seen 20 years of memory, the hands that had pressed against an old table and found grief preserved in wood grain, the hands that had been steady when everything else fell apart tonight, steadier than they had any right to be. I pressed my palm flat against the couch cushion beside me. Images came soft and warm, these three boys again, younger, piled on this couch watching something on a screen. Someone laughing so hard he fell off the edge. The particular easy warmth of people who had chosen each other every day for so long that choosing had become breathing. And then layered underneath, something new. Something that had not been there before tonight because it had not happened yet. 4 people on this couch, the same warmth, bigger. I pulled my hand back slowly. Okay, I said. My voice was steady and clear and fully mine. Let's go take down a corrupt council member. Colton picked up his phone and began filing the sponsorship paperwork without another word. Sawyer crossed the room and squeezed my shoulder once, brief and warm, before moving to help. Miriam watched everything with those dark, precise eyes and the quiet satisfaction of someone watching a long calculation finally resolve. River looked at me from beside the couch and said, "How are you doing?" Actually, I thought about it honestly. The ceremony hall and the applause and the parking lot and the pale blue light and the gravel and the scent like a song I had never heard before, and an elder who wrote my name in a folder before I knew I was anything, and 3 alphas who leaned in when everyone else made space. I died tonight, I said, in one timeline. And in this one, I found out I'm a psychometric Omega with a future sight system and a corrupt council trying to suppress me before I've even had breakfast. I looked at him. But I'm here, and I'm not small anymore. I paused. Ask me again in a week. I might be a disaster. River looked at me with those steady dark eyes and said, "We'll be here in a week." Not a promise performed for effect, just a fact, delivered the way he delivered everything, quietly and with his whole weight behind it. I believed him. The system pulsed one final time at the edge of my vision, gentle and warm, and the text that appeared was shorter than anything it had shown me all night. Well done. Then it went still, not gone, just resting, the way something does when it knows it will be needed again and is content to wait. Outside, in the Sacramento Valley held its dark and patient quiet. The oak trees moved in the valley wind. The stars were exactly where they had been all night, indifferent and beautiful and infinite. Somewhere on Interstate 5, the road moved on without me. I was alive. I was awake. I was sponsored and angry and ready and sitting in a warm house that smelled like pine and cedar and rain, surrounded by people who had leaned in when the whole room made space. And for the first time in 23 years, I was not fine. I was something much better than fine. I was the beginning of something. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed it, you'll definitely love the next one. It's even crazier and more intriguing than you can imagine. Don't forget to subscribe and stay tuned. The next story drops soon.